Hey everybody, we are back with a seedling grafting tutorial. So on one of the last videos where we were talking about grafting seedlings onto more mature rootstock in order to expedite their growth and help them reach a fruiting stage faster for evaluation, we talked about grafting the seedlings in a couple different methods, and some of you actually mentioned and asked for a demonstration about how to perform such a graft if you are trying to do such a thing with one of your citrus seedlings at home. So what I have in front of me here is one of several Trifoliate orange cuttings that I actually rooted starting this past winter when I got a whole bunch of rootstock and I had to cut it down for some grafts for some larger trees. And I had all this excess of branches from those Trifoliate orange trees, and naturally I did not want them to go to waste. We propagated them and actually had some really good success rates. I mean, upwards of 80% with these. So we have a lot of these quart size rooted cuttings here that are actually of a pretty nice caliper, as you can see here. And they are ready for some grafting. So they have a sufficient root system that should give a lot of these seedlings a nice little boost. And one of the other benefits too, besides this just being a little older and a little more mature, is that Trifoliate orange roots are just hardier in general. They're just more robust, more disease resistant, and not as susceptible to root rot as a lot of other citrus. And what I've noticed with some of these hybrids is some of those can also be more susceptible to root rot than Trifoliate orange, even if they are Trifoliate orange hybrids. So it can be kind of variable with that. So it helps nonetheless, at least to give them a healthier root system. And at the most, we can also expedite their growth at the same time. So I have a seedling here, which we'll get that in front of the camera here. This is a Sacaton Citramello, and as you can see, it is highly unifoliate. There's a few leaves that are a little more bifoliate, but broadly speaking, this is a very unifoliate seedling. So this is something that I pulled out here, and I wanted to use this for the demonstration because it also has a pretty nice caliper here for grafting. And basically the type of graft we'll do will be one of my favorites and most successful, which is a side veneer graft. So we are going to make a cut into the rootstock down the side here, insert a small portion of this seedling into the trunk there, and then we will simply wrap it all up together and wait about 2 weeks for the results. So I will get this going, and if you see me doing this at any point in the video, it is to focus this because it's having kind of a hard time here. So let me first cut a portion of our seedling off here, which, you know, I'll do this in front of the camera here too. I'm gonna cut it right here because this is a pretty good thickness here, and you can see the remaining seedling here still has plenty of leaves and growth on it, so I can replant this and use it for future cuttings or just have it as a backup in case this graft fails or if we want more than one plant. So I'm going to put that back in the bucket, and actually before I do, you can see this actually has a pretty good root system on it as well. So that may not be a concern with this specific variety, and it may actually root well from cuttings too, but this will be purely to expedite its growth. So we will shed these leaves off here, get that back in focus. So we're just going to get rid of a few of these at the bottom. All right. And now if you could see that there, we have a nice piece that is without its thorns or leaves, and that will be a good thickness here to insert with the main trunk. So it'll kind of be sticking out a little bit like that. And then once this graft takes, we're going to cut that top portion off and just let it take over this plant. But in the meantime, what's nice is by having this just in the side here and not decapitating the rootstock like you would with just a cleft graft, we are allowing the nutrients to continue to be sent to the scion from the remaining leaves on this rootstock here. So that will be very helpful, and I think that contributes to the success rate that I have with this particular graft. Alright, so just doing this off camera here. Now we have this little piece here And this we're going to wrap in some parafilm, which I have pre-cut already. We got the good stuff here. So this is the real deal parafilm. This is not a Amazon or off-brand one. It's a little more expensive, but 30 bucks gets you like 120 feet. It is totally worth it if you do a lot of grafting, and this stuff works really well. It just peels off. It's like a wax paper there. So we're gonna wrap this all together. All right. So there we got our scion. And now this is my first time recording one of these grafts here, so apologies if this is not as professional as it could be. I'm going to work on figuring out a good setup for this because I do a lot of grafting. It'd be fun to show you guys a lot of these grafts as I do them. So there we go. That's wrapped up pretty nice, and I leave the bottom unwrapped here so that we can make the cut that will connect with the rootstock here. So we're going to save this on the side here. We're going to use that to help wrap this all up together. So we'll just put that over here. Alright, now this is going to be a little trickier. I've got my grafting knife here, but keep in mind you could also use like a box cutter or a razor blade. I've had pretty good success with that too. Just make sure your knife is relatively clean before. I don't always sanitize it, and generally speaking, if this is my first graft of the day, it shouldn't matter too much either. But it's good practice to clean your tools and sanitize them before you're going to perform some grafts. So I'm just going to feel around here. I like to feel around for a flatter piece that will make better contact with here. And you can see this piece is a little bent, but that's okay. We'll make it work. We're just going to insert it a little skewed. So we'll get that focus there. So I think I'm going to cut off of this side. Alright, that's pretty solid there. So if you could see, I've reduced that a bit. And we got that white showing, and in between that white and that green, we got the cambium layer, and that's where all the magic happens. So off camera, I'm just going to make the other cut on the opposite side, because I like to do it against the surface, where I'll press it against the surface and cut away. Alright, so here we go. That is both sides. So we have our longer cut side and our smaller cut side. Now what we're going to do, we're going to make sure we don't drop this in the dirt. Right there, okay. And now we're going to take our rootstock here, and we're going to feel around for a nice spot to make a long cut where we will insert the scion. Alright, so as you can see there, there's our nice little flap. And you can see those layers and everything. We're going to try and line this up and match it as well as we can. Keep in mind with this particular graft, it's nice to have the scion and the rootstock a more similar diameter, but it's not necessary. And I've made a lot of these work this way. Your alternative would be a bark graft where you make like a T cut and you insert this into the T. That works very well too. I just prefer this one, generally speaking. I find it a little bit easier and a little less finicky. Alright, so that should be a pretty interesting. Let me just rotate this around and check that out. Okay. That should be pretty solid, so let me see if I could get you guys an up close look at that. So you can see that scion is skewed, and we got good contact on at least one side. And that's all that matters. You just want one solid side of contact, and then the other side won't matter as much. Eventually they will fuse as this callus expands. So we're just going to wrap our remaining parafilm around this gently and try not to wiggle anything loose. And now the thing is, so we got our initial wrap there. Now our second wrap I'm going to do across the top to make sure, just in case, that no moisture or water gets in. So I like to take a small piece like that, turn this way, and I like to fold it right over the top there. And by this point, you're pretty good there. The parafilm will stick to itself. The only thing now, I'm going to take another small piece and just cover this little bit that's exposed. It might not be necessary, but I like to preserve as much moisture as possible in that scion to give us the best success rate. I mean, it's very humid in the greenhouse, so again, it might not matter that much, but it's just good practice, some of these things. All right, there we go. So you could see that is our nice little tree with our side veneer graft. Now, last step, of course, you want to make sure you label your graft, but I have this, it's like a flagging tape, something like that. It's like a vinyl tape, it's stretchy. It will break if you pull on it too much, but it's very good for like a gentle wrap for this graft here. So I just go exactly over what I just did with the parafilm, but with this stuff, and this allows me to compress the graft with a little bit more pressure, and that helps us secure that really good cambium contact that's going to make this graft successful. And by that point, we got a lot of good wraps over where the graft occurred. So I'm just going to pull this through on itself. We make a nice little knot there, and we break that off. So there you guys go. That is a seedling, as we call it, a micrograft. So we took a very small scion that you otherwise might not consider for grafting purposes, but for us in particular, this is very useful for breeding and selecting new varieties. But this is also something you could do with more mature plants, keep in mind. You could use very small scions and relatively small rootstock as well. But you could repeat this on a large rootstock with a very small scion. You'd probably just do a bark graft at that point, because this graft, at a certain point, if the rootstock's way too big and this is still its size, it's just not a great idea. There's better grafts that can be done. Every graft can work, it's just a matter of what's ideal, and that's where we get all these different grafting methods from. But this will be cool to see. I have a lot of these rooted cuttings because I also don't have any more trifoliate rootstock. I have it all planted out or growing, and I have more grafts to make. I have a lot more material to work with, so I'm really glad I did this. I rooted all these out because by this time of year, I have enough of these that are thick enough to graft and large enough to give us a meaningful result and a head start for next year too. So this unifoliate Sacaton, we'll see how this is looking in a couple weeks and if it starts growing. And maybe I'll even show you a progress picture on some of the other grafts that we've done with this method, just so you can kind of see what it tends to look like 2 or 3 weeks after. So maybe I'll include that now, and then we'll close out the video with that. And here we have a couple of those grafts as promised that were done just a few weeks ago, and you can see one of them is a unifoliate Sacaton, very similar to the one that we just grafted here from a seedling. Also a side veneer graft, just on a little bit larger rootstock, and you can see it's pushing out very nicely after I decapitated the top. And now this one is another one of our 10 degree and Sacaton Citramello hybrids. And this one you can see is highly trifoliate, and it is also a side veneer graft on trifoliate rootstock, and it's been topped and now it's growing very nicely. So these are the kind of results you can expect. And just so we can compare now, this is that graft that we just demonstrated. So you can see exactly how it comes to be and become one of these. So these are potted out in their fabric pots, ready to go in the ground once they are mature enough. This one as well, it's just potted up in some topsoil, and this will be put in one of these fabric pots too, once it starts showing some good signs of life and growth. But it's very cool to see these grafts as they happen and to make it happen with such small scions. So I hope this inspires some of you guys to give it a try, and let me know what you think and how it goes.